Welcome to Manifold. Today, my guest is Carl Za. He is the producer of the Silk and Steel podcast, which is a podcast about, I think, Chinese history and culture are two of the main topics, but I think he sometimes diverges into other things like even geopolitics. Carl is also a very well-known, I think he sometimes describes himself as a shit poster. He tweets at Carl Za on Twitter. That's his handle. And he has something like 100,000 followers almost. So he's quite a presence on Twitter. He was born in China, but grew up in the United States. And like me, attended Caltech as an undergraduate, worked as an engineer, and now lives in Bali. And he's completely fluent in both English and Chinese. So he has a very unique insight into China-US issues. So I've been meaning to have Carl on the podcast for a long time. I saw that he was very active in discussions about the Ukraine crisis, and that's something that we're going to get into. So I'm very happy to finally have Carl on the podcast.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Great. Now, what I like to do with my guests is just start out with a little biographical information because I think it helps people understand your perspective and where you come from. So, as I said in the little intro, you were born in China. What part of China?
I was born in the southwestern part of China in this largely unknown in the West metropolis called Chongqing. The whole Chongqing municipality has like over 30 million people, but the urban area has about 8-9 million people. So it's a big place, but I doubt very, very much people outside of China have heard of it. It was China's wartime capital during World War II. And I was born there in 1976, just 1 month after Mao died. So I'm the first post-cultural revolution generation. And I spent most of my elementary school, actually all my elementary school in China through 1980s. And I came to United States in 1990 in the aftermath of the Tiananmen Square protest, because initially my dad was the first generation Chinese students who came to study in US after the Nixon visit to China. And so he came to US in 1985 to pursue his PhD. And his original plan was get his PhD and return back to China, where he was already a lecturer at the Chongqing University. Upon his return, he will basically be guaranteed like a 10-year professorship. But 1989 Tiananmen Square protests happened, and like many overseas Chinese students, my parents also joined the protest. So both my mom joined my dad in 1987. So I was left alone with my sister in Chongqing, be taken care of by our grandma. And after 1989 student protest crackdown, my parents, like many of their generation, they also protested in US outside of the Chinese consulate. And they decided they will not return to China. And they started the process to bring me out to United States. I was 13, almost 14 in October 1990 when I first came to United States. So it's an interesting age. But the China I grew up in 1980s was the China under Deng Xiaoping's open and reform era. So maybe I was sheltered as a child, but I had a very happy childhood in China. So I always have fond memories. And just from growing up, I can observe that lives were getting better and better. I still remember in 1980, when I was 4 years old, my mom used her savings to buy my grandparents a black and white television. And that was a first television in kind of like the whole residential neighborhood. So all the kids will come to grandma's house to watch TV. That was 1980. And we didn't have our first color TV until I think 1986. After my dad already came to United States, he sent back his savings. At that time in China, you can't even buy imported goods freely. You have to have foreign currency. So my dad sent back U.S. dollars. My mom then got exchange at the Bank of China for back then so-called the foreign exchange certificate. So with a foreign exchange certificate, you can go to a specific store called the friendship store, which it was catered to foreigners and the people with hard currency. So with that, they bought a Panasonic color TV. That was 1986. So I remember this vividly because this is kind of like when the markers of my childhood. We changed from the black and white TV to a color television. And back then, China didn't produce a lot of these consumer goods either, because, like I said, back in 1986, there weren't many. I don't know if there's any domestically produced color TV in China. So everything has to be imported, from fertilizer to transistor radio. To get a Sony radio or like not even Walkman, just just a radio. That was a prestige thing in China back then. Like to get married, there's like 4 big items gotta have. Was first it was bicycle, a sewing machine, and then got changed to you gotta have the radio, you gotta have a color TV, you gotta have a refrigerator. And China didn't even produce refrigerator back then, I don't think, because we also bought our first refrigerator, which again was uh, through remittance from my dad, and my mom bought another Japanese made refrigerator in the friendship store. But just a year later, I started noticing my classmates' parents, they start to buy color TV and fridge, but they're now being domestically made in China. And that's the beginning of the made in China trend. I still remember coming to United States in 1990. Like it was a game for us to find made in China items in United States. I would get so excited. In the Christmas 1990, we found a teddy bear that was made in China, and my parents bought it for me because it was an exciting thing to find made in China item back then. Of course, like few years later, everything's made in China. So
So
yeah, go ahead.
it's interesting that, I like a true Caltech geek, it's electronic appliances that are the milestone purchases that you remember. I want to ask you, do you remember meat scarcity?
Ah,
Like not having a lot of meat, or maybe your grandmother would give you her meat portion. That's something that I think Westerners, they can maybe understand. Even I can understand growing up in Iowa, remembering like when we got our first big color TV and it was kind of a big deal or something. I'm older than you, of course, but something like meat scarcity is something that I think Americans can't imagine.
yeah. So when I was growing up in 1980s China, ration was still a thing. You need ration paper to purchase anything from state operated stores. So from sugar to clothes to oil to include meat. And it's only when I started to walk, maybe not start to walk. When I'm 4 to 5 years old, like in early 1980s, that's when they first started to allow so-called free market, 自由市场 in China. Those are just basically farmers market where the farmers will bring their produce directly to the city to sell to the consumers. Because before that, you have to buy everything from the state. The state, they buy everything from the farmers and then they sell at the specific state designated store. And in the city, as a city resident, we have to have ration papers to be able to buy. And there's quotas for each. Like for us, I remember as a 13-year-old teenager, I actually have higher rice allotment than the rest of my family members because as a growing teen, I'm entitled to have more rice. And the ration system only got phased out during the end of 1980s. Like, so just before I left China, the rations were used less and less. I remember it was when there was a lot of rural migrants who started to come to city to work because before China, the movement was strictly controlled. Before 70s, if you're a rural migrants, if your household registration is in the countryside, you can very easily move to the city. But 1980s is when first that relaxation, there's a relaxation in that restriction, and a lot of rural youth start to come to cities for work, but they couldn't get the urban resident benefit, for example, for the ration papers. So I remember a lot of farmers' girls will come around our neighborhood bringing eggs to trade for rice ration papers. And we have a lot
Mhm.
of rice ration papers, so we would trade them for eggs. It was a thing back in 1980s. Yeah.
So, you came to the US at a very special age. So you were old enough to remember, to have pretty mature memories of growing up in China, and then it must have been quite a shock for you to where did you immigrate to initially?
I landed in Chicago. So to give a little perspective, I didn't actually wanted to come to US because I was free in China. Like my parents are in United States. My grandpa had some health conditions and my grandma spent most of the time taking care of him. So basically nobody really managed me and my sister. My sister is older. And so I had a lot of freedom and I didn't want it to come to United States and be under the thumb of my parents again. And in China, before I came to United States, I spent 1 year at home because I contracted hepatitis A through sharing food with my friend, and I was hospitalized for a couple months, and then I wasn't able to catch up with schoolwork, so I stayed home for a month. Oh, by the way, that my hospitalization was all free because back then China was still running like a socialist central plan economy. If you're urban resident, like my grandparents, my grandma was a school teacher at this textile factory attached school. So and each work unit, each like a factory, they will have their own kind of complete welfare system, like kindergarten, schools, and hospitals. So I would go to all these for free. But after 2 months, Chinese schoolwork is serious work. It's like after 2 months of not attending to school, I cannot catch up. So I have to just stay behind the grade. And that whole year I stayed at home and I read a lot, magazines, anything. At that time, a lot of the Western ideas are starting to filter into China, right? I read Chinese magazine talking about how small government is the best government. So all the Republican ideas also getting filtered into China. And I also read about how Japan is rising and United States is in decline. This is late 80s, right? At the height of the Japan bubble. So when I came to US, my parents were poor because my dad was supporting a family of four on his postdoc income. He was working at University of Illinois at Chicago. And so we lived in like 31st hosted in a very working class neighborhood, and we're so poor that I qualify for free lunch at school. And I remember after 8th grade, because my English wasn't that good, there are not many options for me to attend high school. So I ended up going to Kenwood Academy in south side of Chicago in Hyde Park, just outside of University of Chicago. So I don't know if you know University of Chicago, but University of Chicago is a ghetto within a ghetto, like I used to say. But my high school was just outside of it. So we are in the ghetto. I mean, if you go to the description of Kenwood Academy today, you will say something like, oh, 93% of the student enrollment is minority students. Of course, minority is a euphemism because I mean, what is 90%, 93% of the student body is really not minority anymore. So my school was like 85% black, maybe 2.5% Asian. So I was that 2.5% Asian. And I remember seeing people getting shot in the schoolyard. Like one day I was getting off the math team practice, like a typical Asian nerd. And right as I leaving the school building, some girl ran in, so and so got shot. and everybody was rushing in to see the body. It's kind of crazy now think about it. Oh, I wanted to go see too, but my bus was coming, and I have an hour and a half bus ride to catch to go home. So I ran for the bus, only saw the crowd gathering around the body, and then later when I watched evening news, it says somebody got killed in my school, a schoolyard shooting. And I had to take 1 hour and a half bus ride through south side of Chicago, through all the dilapidated buildings and housing project. And at that time, I really thought, oh my God, it's true what I read in the Chinese magazines. United States is in decline. I came too late. and because I would see dilapidated infrastructure, just all the neighborhood in ruins. And so for me, my strong motivation in high school was to get out of inner city, to get to the middle class, right? The American dream. And so I did that. And I work hard. I was like your typical, I guess, like your model minority myth, right? I bury my head in my books. I study for SAT, and I tested out. So after spending freshman year in Kingwood Academy, I found this opportunity through my dad's friends that there's this school in Aurora, Illinois called IMSA, Illinois Math and Science Academy. It's like a
Yeah, it's very, very famous.
yeah, it's an experimental school where they get state funding from basically the same pool for the colleges. So they were able to run like experimental curriculum on us, so using us as guinea pigs. But they take like top 2% or top 1% of the high school students from all across the state. So to get in, you have to take SAT, you have to get teacher's recommendation, write essay. Basically, it's just like a mini college application process. And I work for a whole like my first year in freshman year, I just basically spent the entire year studying English, working on SAT, and eventually I got in. And for me, that was my escape. My escape from the urban decay of
Yeah,
America.
and you were boarding there, is that right?
Yes, because you have to live on campus, even if your home is like a block from the school. You have to live on campus. So for me, that's the greatest gift because I was like what 15, 16. I was living away from my parents again. Freedom, that's what inspired me. So it's like live on a college campus basically, and we have to go home once a month because school knows otherwise we would never go home. So they kick us out. They kick us out once they shut down the school campus once a month, force us to go home. And but that was my escape because our school was in the middle of the cornfield, and to me that was paradise. It's totally different world from inner city Chicago where I was used to. That just kind of stiffen my resolve to get into middle class, join the ranks of American dream. So, I studied SAT again, applied for college, got into Caltech. And at that time, I thought I'm kind of I really felt I was living the American dream. I'm like this poor immigrant boy who got into Caltech through hard work. And so, yeah, so this is kind of my background. Sorry for taking so long.
No, it was very interesting, but maybe I can ask you some questions. So I'm curious because you were very conscious of wanting to climb out of deprivation
Yes.
and make it into the middle class. Were you strategic about choosing, for example, going to engineering focused school and pursuing engineering as a career? Maybe not because you liked the subject so much, but just because you knew it was economically advantageous?
That's definitely a reason. Also because my dad was an engineer, right? At the time, my choices was either going to engineering or medicine. But my dad finally landed a private sector job in 1995 after the economy got better. But still, like I didn't want to burden them with having to support me through 8 years of med school. So I thought, by choosing engineering route, that's the fastest way for me to achieve financial independence, or so I thought. So I thought yeah, definitely that's one reason I chose engineering.
Yeah, that's a very immigrant kind of story. For me, because my dad was already a professor, I actually grew up in a very similar environment because I grew up in Iowa. And so I lived, my neighbors had cornfields and things like this too. I lived out in the country and went to kind of not as elite a high school as the one that you attended, but kind of an elite high school because it was the only high school in this college town. But I had the luxury of not being worried about climbing the social ladder. I was already securely in the middle class or upper middle class. And so I could say, oh, I'm going to do theoretical physics because that's what I'm most interested in. And Richard Feynman is my hero.
Mm.
Whereas I think in your case, you were like a lot of people choosing their course of study really for, economic reasons.
Yes, yes. Very my is a very typical kind of immigrant. I guess I'm the 1.5 generation
Yep.
immigrant. So yeah. Yeah, it's very typical because my parents they just want to, their biggest hope for me is that I will get a good paying job that, I will, live my American dream.
Yep.
Yeah.
Coming back to Tiananmen,
Mhm.
your parents were actually involved in.
So my parents were not, because they're already in United States, right? So
I see. Okay.
they went to the protest rally outside of the Chinese consulate in Chicago. I was in Chongqing at the time. At the time, there's protests all over China, not just Beijing. Of course, Tiananmen was a focal point. And I lived on the Chongqing University campus because my dad was a lecturer there, and he kept his housing, even though he was in U.S. because at that time he was intending to come back because the university provided housing for his faculty. So at the time, initially I thought, oh man, these college students, they just don't want to go to school, man. This is just like a holiday for them. Because I lived on campus since 1982, and there has been all sort of student protests every year. The very first student protest I experienced was before I started the first grade. There was a lot of tunnels dug in Chongqing, both as an anti-air raid shelter during World War II against the Japanese bombing of Chongqing, and during Cultural Revolution when Mao's China thought he might have to fight two-front war against both Soviet Union and United States. Chongqing is a very hilly city, but the entire hills are being dug out and there's tunnels underneath. But after 1980s, when the Cold War was already winding down, and U.S. China relationship was actually in its honeymoon phase. So University of Chongqing rented out its own tunnels to like enterprising farmers to raise mushrooms, and and when the farmers went in tunnels, they somehow found something, some kind of nuclear, some radioactive, I guess some radioactive stuff from some experiment back in the days. And then the Chongqing University student organized a huge protest. I remember the banners they held, like "Huang wo qingcun," give back my youth, because they were outraged. There were like radioactive material stored on campus. So when Tiananmen Square protests first started, I thought it's just going to be one of those. I thought, oh, those college students being frivolous again. They just don't want to go to school. I was a little bit resentful and jealous because our high school still, I went to junior high then, seventh grade, so we still had to go to school. Whereas the college students, they didn't have
Right.
classes anymore. But at one point, all segment of society was joining in. I even had my elementary school teachers that their teacher union went on the street. So I also went to the Chongqing, the city's center. It's very exhilarating in any kind of mass movement. Like all these people you look up to, they're all like on the street protesting. And so I started something in my school, in my junior high. I posted a poster calling, because this was right around the time when like central government in China was kind of waffling back and forth on its position. I guess there was a power struggle at the top between two different factions. So there was one point where they said, "Oh, the student movement is a patriotic movement." And so I took that opportunity to, write a poster in my junior high in support of the college students. And then I got, and all the, because at the time my motivation was just like, I don't want to go to school anymore. I want to I want to stop classes. And then all my classmates, they kind of fed me around as a hero, and it felt good. It felt good. But my plan didn't work. We still had to go to school. Our homeroom teacher was like an old communist lady, and she's like, "Okay, yeah, okay, yeah. We understand that the state said it's patriotic movement, but to be patriotic, you first need to be educated. So get back to
There
classes.
you go.
Yeah, so that was my experience of the Tiananmen Square, because Chongqing is one of the few cities that there wasn't there wasn't a lot of violence. The only thing that happened was on the new it was really weird, Tiananmen Square, because the state media, CCTV, was broadcasting live every day, what's going on in Beijing, Tiananmen Square. So we saw the people of Beijing stopping the army trucks from going in. The army was stuck outside of Beijing for a week, right? And we saw that on state television. And then again, I think that's because of power struggle at the top. But then on June 4th, I remember suddenly all the television broadcasts stopped. The TV went blank because at that time everybody was glued to their television to watch what's going on in Beijing. But from the afternoon to evening until the next day, the TV went out for a whole 24 hours. And when you came back on again, they said, oh, there was a counter-revolutionary riot in Beijing that the People's Liberation Army have to put down. So it was a big shock for a lot of people, because at that time, the students actually had a lot of popular support. And everybody was kind of whiplashed by kind of the 180-degree turn of the kind of the government stance, because one moment they say the student movement was a patriotic movement, and the next thing they say there was a counter-revolution riot. We don't know what to believe. And then after school started again next year, actually, was it after the school started? So again, our homeroom teacher, the old communist lady, organized us to watch a state-produced documentary of how everything went down. So we saw we saw burning of tanks. We saw like people throwing Molotov cocktails at tanks, and soldiers being dragged from the burning tanks and then being lynched and getting disemboweled and burned on the bridge. And so they say, yeah, this is why the army had to go in. So, but
Do you think that was real? Do you think the video that you saw was real, or do you think it was fake?
No, it was real. I mean, there's a lot of people can search, but of course the state exaggerated, because like when they did announce the special, like what they call it, the 共和国卫士, the Guard of Republic, to the soldier martyrs. But there were only a few. There were only like a handful of soldiers who died. So compared to the other casualties, because the Tiananmen mother, they found out about names of about 200 Beijing residents who died. Compared to a handful of soldiers. So that's the first time I encountered kind of this different-sided narrative, because when I came to the United States, my parents showed me the CNN footage, right? They showed the footage of People's Liberation Army opening fire on the crowd. And that is when I kind of encountered this totally kind of almost like black and white, narrative. At one point, I remember at IMSA, I asked my history teacher, who is actually a Native American graduate from Stanford, and I said, look, like the history I learned in China and the history I learned in the United States is almost like polar opposite, right? How do I reconcile these two completely different opposite narratives? He said, oh, you just got to read a lot. So read all the resources, and then you can flesh out the big picture. At that time, I thought his advice is totally useless. I mean, like, my problem is they're totally opposite. How do I reconcile, right? Just read more of them. How do I even make sense out of it? But it turns out, I think he's right. He's right. You gotta read all sides and then come to your own conclusion.
Yeah, I think that advice is particularly appropriate in this moment. Not just talking about Ukraine, but just in general, there are so many competing narratives on almost every topic now. It's very tough to know what to believe. And you could even take a radical view that history is kind of impossible, in the sense that we don't even really know what happened, say, in the last election, or when Kennedy was shot or something, let alone what happened, say, 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. So it seems like there's a high degree of uncertainty in almost everything.
Yeah, that's why actually I love history, because history for me is like detective work. You have to know how to read between the lines. You gotta read the official annals, and then you got to read the unofficial history, and then you got to kind of tease out the truth from the official narratives. And so for me, that's fun. And like my original intent for starting my podcast, Silicon Steel, was to kind of share my love of Chinese history and Chinese culture to Anglophone audience. But yeah, but as you mentioned, I kind of got pushed into doing the politics of it, because today, in the increasing U.S. China tensions, I just see a lot of disinfo floating around, and I felt
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
let's get to that. But just to finish up your biography, so you went to Caltech, you studied engineering at Caltech, electrical engineering.
Yeah, I graduated in 2000. Back then there weren't even a computer science department. But when I graduated, that was the height of the first internet bubble. Everybody, even English lit majors, went into internet startups. So I joined an internet software company. I joined their professional service arm, Vignette, which was a content management company that was
Oh, sure, I remember Vignette. Were
yeah.
you in the Bay Area?
No. So their headquarters in Austin, Texas. But my
Okay.
brother-in-law joined early, and so he got a referral bonus out of me. And at that time at that time all the internet companies, they just want warm bodies. You can type, okay, good, you're hired. And so I got hired before I even graduated from Caltech. And because I had to go back to finish some classes, and then I started working December 1999, like just few months left before the internet bubble burst. Yeah.
Yes. So you worked in tech basically from that point in time
Yes.
until you wanted to take a year off. And so that's how you ended up traveling here in Asia. What year was that?
The end of 2018, actually. 2018, the company that I was working for, their largest client is Toyota. And Toyota decided they're going to cut costs by moving their headquarters from Torrance, California to Plano, Texas. And I'm a surfer. I love surfing. And I know from Plano, Texas is 6 hours to the ocean in either direction. So there's no way I'm going to move to Plano. And so I thought, okay, this is a good opportunity for me to just take some time off and travel around Asia. Just so happened, one of my internet friend, who is an Aussie English teacher in kind of the most remote corner of China, he's working at this border town between China and Myanmar. And he told me that the place where he work at, the city he work at, holds the largest water festival in China. The water festival is just like the same as a Thai Songkran. It's like the Thai New Year. And the Thai people in the region, they have a very historical tie, with people in Thailand and Myanmar. And so the water festival is huge, because I always told him, I wanted to experience the water festival because I saw a part of as a part of a dance in the pre-cultural revolution musical, the Yeast is Red. Like my favorite part of Yeast is Red musical is actually the nationality dance, the different uh, Chinese nationalities doing their traditional dance. And there was a part featuring water festival of Thai women. And he said, oh, he invited me to go. So I just jumped at the opportunity. At that time, I didn't plan to leave United States. I just put my stuff in storage. I went to China, and then I travel around, and then I haven't surfed for a long time. So I decided to go to Bali for a couple months to get my surfing on. And then when I was in Bali, I realized, I remember distinctly. I was at the surf line. I was talking to people, fellow surfers. I asked them, "Oh, how long you been in Bali?" I expect them to say, "Oh, the last 2 weeks, like maybe a month." And they say, "Oh, I've been here for 6 years." I'm like, "What? How do you do that?" They say, "Oh, it's easy. You just do visa runs. You just fly to Singapore or Malaysia for a day and come back." because before pandemic, as American citizen, you have you don't need visa. You have visa free entry to places like Indonesia. You get automatic 30 days. And when you land at the airport, you have the option to get visa on arrival. You pay like $35 for visa on arrival, which allow you to extend for another month. So a lot of people were doing that. And I thought, wow, why nobody told me about this like 10 years ago? I could have been in Bali for 10 years. So that's my story. That's how I ended up in Bali.
So since then, you've been living the digital nomad dream in Bali. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, initially I was living on my savings, and then eventually I built enough internet notoriety to get a small following on Patreon. So now, yes, now I'm able to support myself on my Patreon income, me and my family. So I'm grateful for that.
So one of the topics I wanted to get to is the topic of Xinjiang. And I think I've seen a fair amount of discussion by you and around you about what is actually happening in Xinjiang. And this is a very controversial topic, obviously, with the United States and the West going all, getting to the point where they're actually charging China with genocide and pointing to, for example, satellite photographs of concentration camps in Xinjiang.
Yes.
And I've traveled in China many times, but I've never been able to travel to either the southwest or the northwest. So I've never been to Xinjiang. But because I was interested in eventually taking a trip there, I was watching a lot of YouTube travel video, both of areas like Yunnan, but also areas like Xinjiang. And I could tell from what the travelers were saying that it was totally inconsistent with what I was reading in the media about the state of, there were some issues with terrorism and there was a crackdown on Islamic terrorism in Xinjiang. And I'm sure there were probably human rights abuses. I mean, it's an authoritarian government and they don't fool around. And these terrorist I think it was knife, but also maybe bomb attacks.
Yeah, both. They had the infamous Kunming train station knife attacks where I think 20 people were killed, and then there was bombing attack at the Urumqi train station to coincide with Xi Jinping's visit. Yeah.
Yes. So I guess one of my goals is to give the audience your best estimate of what is really happening there. And just to give my background of it, I mean, I was aware of these, terrorist incidents. And then obviously you can expect that, an authoritarian government like in China is going to react in a pretty decisive manner against that. And so maybe there were some human rights abuses and maybe, some action against, groups that the government regarded as extremists. But because there were so many people traveling through Xinjiang, including like there's one famous like Australian guy who was like bicycling
Yeah,
through
scary.
Xinjiang.
Yeah. I interviewed
Yeah,
him.
and so I watched all this stuff not because I was particularly interested in the political situation, because I was actually just thinking of traveling there on vacation because it was an exotic place I was always interested in.
That's
But
something people don't know. So if you have a Chinese visa, if you're allowed inside China, then you can travel to Xinjiang. There's no extra restriction on traveling to Xinjiang.
absolutely, and your yuppie friends in Shanghai can go to Xinjiang for the weekend
Yep.
and take video and put the video online and other people like me can watch it. So the idea that they could hide a genocide with so much flow of people, including Western tourists, including Chinese tourists from within China, and everybody has a cell phone camera. It just seemed to me absurd because just even by just sitting on my butt and watching YouTube, I could tell that what I was being told by the New York Times didn't seem accurate at all. And so anyway, that look, I just want to cue you up and maybe you can first just start with a general statement about what you think is really going on there, and then we can get into more details.
Yeah, sure. So the situation really came to a head in 2009, Urumqi riot, July 5th, 2009, Urumqi riot, where basically nearly 200 people were killed, 2,000 people were injured, and the victims were mostly Han Chinese residents in the city. And after that, there has been security crackdown in Xinjiang since 2009, because that was a pretty shocking incident in China. Something like this haven't happened, in decades. And then a spate of more serious, equally, I would say not more serious incident happened around the time of Syrian war, actually, from 2012 to 2014. So first there was attack in Tiananmen Square, a group of Uyghur separatists, they drove a van loaded with explosive onto Tiananmen Square, and they were ramming into the crowd. But it's not. I think maybe it's not home. It's either. I think it's a can of oil of gasoline that they brought on board. And anyways, they ran into the crowd and then lit the car on fire and exploded. And but that again, that was pretty shocking. And then the big shock was the Kunming train station attack, because there has been a series of attacks inside Xinjiang, but people in rest part of China thought that was a localized Xinjiang problem. And until the attack in Tiananmen Square, and then in March 1st, 2014, in Kunming train station in the capital Yunnan province, all the way to the southwest of China, as far from Xinjiang as possible, 8 Uyghur militants armed with knives start slashing at people, killing 20 people, injure many more. And those got national headlines. And then, as I mentioned, there was also a series of bombings in Urumqi. People were driving SUVs into the morning market and throwing bombs at people setting up shops, setting up street vendors, basically. And after that, Chinese state started a series of security crackdown. First, they blocked all the access of Xinjiang to Central Asia. And then I think that is why those Uyghur militants actually travel all the way to Yunnan, because there was also, starting from 2012, there's a stream of Uyghur refugees start to appear in places like Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, but their end goal was to reach Malaysia. In Kuala Lumpur airport, when they reach Kuala Lumpur, at the Turkish consulate, where they would receive the Turkish passport, allow them to fly to Turkey. And as soon as they step off their plane in Istanbul, they're greeted by jihadist recruiters to urge them to go on to Syria. Now, this is reported in Associated Press, right? So people can look that up. And thousands of Uyghur fighters ended up in Idlib province of Syria, northwest Syria. So this has been an ongoing problem. And starting from 2017, that's when Chinese government really started the hard crackdowns. That's when they have they built the so-called vocational training centers. I mean, they might as well just call them de-radicalization centers, because that's what they are. And then there are a lot of people who are suspected of harboring sympathies for the terrorists were sent there. And there's like different levels of kind of so-called re-education. One is you go you just have to go spend like half a day during the daytime, and then you can get to go home. The other type of re-education is where you have to stay in the center. It's basically incarceration. And that's getting picked up in the West. First, there were the primary reports that's all the Western media is based on. One is from the China Human Rights Defenders, which is an NED sponsored founded group. And I read the reports. My friend queued me up to it. Their report supposedly is based on supposed interview of 8 Uyghur villagers from 8 villages in southern Kashgar. And based on the villagers' testimonial, they extrapolated from the population of those 8 villages to the entire population of Xinjiang. So they said, okay, we estimate about 10% of the people, 9 to 10% of the people from the villages are being sent to these re-education centers. So if we extrapolate to the entire Uyghur population of Xinjiang, which is like 11 to 12 million, we get 1 million figure. They said that in the report, China Human Rights Defender report. And so they even put the caveat in the report. We must, be careful that this is an extrapolation. But this kind of the nuance is completely lost in the mainstream media report. They take the 1 million figure as kind of the gospel truth.
Yeah, 1 million being just 10% of 11 million people,
Yep.
basically,
Yep.
which they extrapolate from some survey of 8 people.
Yep. On eight people from 8 villages. And then the other report is from the German researcher working at the Victim of Communism Foundation, Adrian Zenz. So Adrian Zenz came up with a paper where he based on his claim primarily on this Turkish, the Uyghur exile group in Turkey, which, by the way, has ties with the Turkestan Islamic Party, which is Al Qaeda affiliate and fighting in Syria. So this Uyghur exile group provided a so-called leaked document that shows the number of people being sent to the re-education camps, and based on that, Adrian Zenz it's another extrapolation extrapolated to the whole of Xinjiang to he estimated 1 million figure. So it has always been an extrapolation, but it's always reported in CNN as kind of some kind of hard figure. They definitely have 1 million Uyghur in camps. Yeah.
When I first became aware of this, I just thought to myself, if you're going to lock up 10% of the population of some region, you're going to need a very, very strong police state. And the remaining 9/10 that are not locked up are going to be very traumatized, because almost everyone will know someone well who got locked up.
Yes.
And if there really were a genocide, that would mean the person who was locked up probably died, or had a good chance of being.
Right.
So then if you then look at the video shot by Western tourists during that period of time when travel through Xinjiang was totally unrestricted, or video shot by tourists from other parts of China, and you just see the interactions, how relaxed they are between the police and the local people and the tourists. It just could not possibly be that 10% of the population was being genocided or locked up. It just didn't seem consistent with what was in the videos that I watched.
Yeah, and there's also like in the media, I know this is something I noticed about the language. When they talk about Uyghurs being oppressed, it's they're talking about Uyghurs. When they talk about the police, they always talk about Chinese police. They're trying to create some kind of dichotomy between Chinese and Uyghur. And what they don't tell you is most of the police in southern Xinjiang, where majority of the Uyghur live, most of the police are Uyghur. They're local police. It's not like they're sending the Han Chinese policemen all the way from Beijing to Xinjiang. Another thing is that they try so hard to prove it's genocide, but as you mentioned, there's no mass death. So that's why Adrian Zenz came up with this restriction on birth, because one of the UN definition of genocide is if somehow they're trying to reduce the population through forcible abortions or forcible birth control, right? And so that's a new area they're focusing on. So China had a one-child policy since forever. It was already starting to get rolled out when I was born in 1976, because at that time my parents were working in the Tibetan regions. They got sent there during Cultural Revolution. I was conceived on the Tibetan plateau, but my parents didn't want me to grow up there because they felt I can get better education and better healthcare if I stay with my grandma in my mom's hometown. So my mom went back to Chongqing to give birth to me, but she was having a hard time finding a hospital that would accept her, because the first hospital she went to was kind of the model hospital for implementing family planning and then one-child policy. And so they're questioning my mom, why you're having a second child. My mom explained, because that's 1976 is when they're first rolling out the one-child policy. Chongqing as a big city was one of the first to was selected, but that policy didn't affect the Tibetan areas. It didn't affect there was no one-child policy applied to Tibetans. And for the Han Chinese working in Tibetan area, like my parents, they were allowed to have 2 children. So I was legitimate. And but the hospital director didn't understand because they only understand their government quota and directive for their hospital. They're like, "What do you mean? Tibet is not part of China? Why are you having 2 child?" And so my mom had to like, go through my grandma's connection, finally find a hospital that would accept her, and so I was born.
But
So
I think maybe the point you're leading to is that for Uyghurs during all this time, they were not subject to the one-child policy.
yes, yes. So for the Rubia Kadir, who was crowned like the president of the World Uyghur Congress and has been feted around as like the courageous Uyghur leader standing up to China, she had 11 children. The first 6 children she had was before the, rolling out, I think before 1970s, before the rolling out of the one child policy. And she had another 5 children after that because the one child policy was not applied to national minorities. But that started to change in the the last few years because now China is going on to the 3-child policy. But now that 3-child policy is applied equally across nationwide. So for the first time, yes, birth planning, family planning is being introduced to Xinjiang, but they're not being limited to 1 child, 2 child. They're being, 3-child policy. We can argue the merits, the ethics of family planning. That's a different conversation, but they're essentially arguing that is same as genocide, right? I mean, so basically, Chinese government had been genociding the Han Chinese people since 1970s.
Yeah, well, just to clarify, so there was a period of time for a few years where, they were actually trying to make noises about outright genocide against Uyghurs
Yep,
in concentration camp-like structures.
yep,
And they seem to have backed away from that now, and now it's sort of shifted a little more toward either
cultural
this birth,
genocide.
yeah, either birth restriction kind of genocide or cultural genocide, meaning like requiring immigrants to America to learn English or something.
Yeah,
And so my feeling is there's almost no questioning of this narrative. So, if you read New York Times or Washington Post or, even The Economist, there's almost, as far as I can tell, no questioning of this. And they now just routinely refer to some kind of nefarious activities, anti-Uyghur activities in Xinjiang without, now they don't feel any need to
yep.
clarify it or even go to the original sources.
And
But
you had
you're
Bill Maher recently in his talk show. He said on his talk show, he said China is locking up the entire Uyghur ethnicity. He just
Yeah.
throwing that out there. He pulled that out of his butt because there's total of 12 million Uyghurs in China. He's claiming China is locking up the entire Uyghur ethnicity of 12 million, which is
well, again, going back to my, so people are probably tired of hearing me mention YouTube, but you can go on YouTube right now and you can find some tourist video that was shot, in the last 3 months. And some tourist is talking to some Uyghur who owns a restaurant. The restaurant could even be in Beijing or it could be in Urumqi or something. And they seem very happy and they're not locked up. And I mean, the whole story can be undermined with
yeah,
5 minutes of work, I
yeah.
think.
But
So
there are people who get targeted. Those are like kind of the hardcore Islamicist that has been targeted in China. That there's no doubt in the people who are inclined to hardcore Islamic fundamentalism and their family, that they have been targeted by the Chinese state. That is a fact. But there's definitely not a blanket targeting of the entire ethnicity. That's not true. And also, I just like to talk about that birth, so-called the birth genocide again. How the hell do you carry out genocide with a 3-child policy? How mathematically that's
well,
impossible.
of course. I'm sure the rate of Uyghur population growth has always exceeded and still exceeds the rate of Han population growth in China. So it's far from a genocide in
Yeah,
that respect. So in terms of how this kind of massive propaganda campaign is carried out, let me give you my model. And I have a little bit of experience with both NED and the CIA because my tech startup, the first tech startup I did, which was right around the time you graduated from college, it was right during the first tech bubble, was an encryption startup. And one of our investors was the CIA venture fund, which was just newly created around that time. And we worked with NED and Radio Free Asia to defeat the Chinese firewall, which was just being
Ah,
created at the time.
yeah.
So I'm pretty familiar with the idea that, NED funds these NGOs all over the place. Some of the NGO people are researchers. Some of them are directly active in foreign countries in organizing, pro-democracy movements, pro-democracy organizations.
I just
Um,
wanted to add that Chinese people do appreciate those free VPN and ladders to climb the firewall. Well, so sometimes CIA and RFA do some good work.
oh, well, yeah, this is a whole different discussion. We could
Yeah,
have a long discussion about
censorship. Yeah.
my, idealistic ideas that some of the technology we were developing at the startup could be used, for this purpose, which is why we were working with organizations like CIA and NED. But at least it gave me a little window of how the money flows from the federal government to NGOs in these foreign countries and how it is tied into U.S. national security and intelligence operations. So this guy, Adrian Zenz, and perhaps some of the other researchers that purport to document or analyze these anti-Uyghur activities in Xinjiang, they're probably getting money, maybe without knowing it, but at least indirectly from, potentially actually Central Intelligence sources or NED sources.
Oh, I'm pretty sure Victim of Communism Foundation is funded by the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, people can just look
Yeah.
it
So
up.
there's a long list of grants that come from NED.
Yep.
And I'm familiar with this because, some of the funding for our startup came from US government sources. And that was the whole purpose of one of the purposes of the CIA Venture Fund was to find technology companies that could help the CIA in its mission. And so they would direct us to, certain funding sources in the federal government. Those sources obviously then are in a sense doing what U.S. national security or intelligence services would like them to do. But then, of course, they are then introduced to friendly journalists
Hmm.
at the establishment papers like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, et cetera. And then those journalists who are kind of used to working with sources that are in the U.S. intelligence community will cover the research of these NGOs, which makes some allegations about some foreign government. It might be true, it might not be true, but there's a pipeline from the product, the work product that seems to come from an quote independent researcher at an NGO, but perhaps who is receiving NED funds to prestige media in the United States, and then it's covered uncritically. And eventually, I think in this case, has been completely established now as the standard narrative, even though the whole thing is not reflective of actual reality.
This makes so much sense because me and the Aussie biker guy that you mentioned, Jerry Gray. So not only they're pushing this narrative in mainstream media, but they're also hitting out people who are challenging their narrative. So Coda Stories wrote a hit piece against me and Jerry Gray, the biker, Aussie biker who went to Xinjiang. The title is Pro Beijing Influencers and their rose-tinted view of life in Xinjiang.
Yeah.
And I had the foresight to ask Isabel Cockrell, who was the interviewer, that if it's okay if I record the conversation, and she agreed to it. So when she, totally posted our interview out of context, I was able to upload the audio of our interview, to my subscribers and followers on YouTube. And she was trying to paint me as some kind of airhead surfer dude who just, sprouting pro Beijing views without totally realizing what's going on. But it couldn't be.
But sorry to interrupt. But by the way, I advise everyone, you know, most people don't deal with the press very often, but I have had a fair amount of interaction with
the press in my life, and you should record every interaction with every journalist, and you should tell them that you're recording it so that they know they can't falsify what you said or take it out of context, and let them know that you'll come right at them on their Twitter. If they try to pull something, you'll come right at them on their Twitter feed and post what you actually said and the context of what you said if they quote you out of context. I think that's the only way to keep these people. It doesn't actually completely work, but it is a way to keep them more honest
Yes,
than they
definitely.
otherwise would be. So in your case, yes, I think you guys got smeared. It's a total accident that I was interested in. To me, like Northwest Xinjiang and Southwest Yunnan are like the exotic, interesting parts of China that I'd never been to. Because I didn't have time to travel there, I was thinking of traveling eventually, and I was just watching a lot of video. And so this guy Gary bicycling across Xinjiang, I found that totally organically, just because of my own interest. The YouTube AI,
Mm,
it watches what you like and it shows you more of what you like. Maybe not as well as TikTok. We can get to that later,
mhm.
but it is a decent learning algorithm. And so it just started showing me more and more essentially tourist video of Xinjiang. And it kind of figured out that I would watch some occasionally, like even Chinese language content. So it started showing me video taken by actual Chinese tourists who went to Xinjiang.
Yeah.
And because people don't realize there's tremendous amount of internal within China tourism. So some affluent family in Beijing or Shanghai or Shenzhen might go to Xinjiang as a week trip. It's as an exotic vacation or something.
Yeah, my auntie from Chongqing, they went to Xinjiang. I mean, tens of millions of Chinese domestic tourists goes to Xinjiang every year. Well, before the
Yeah,
pandemic. Yeah.
so you get this totally different perspective of, oh, it's not a police state under lockdown where 10% of the population is getting genocided. It's actually a place where you just casually go and you fly there and you eat some lamb and and the language written on the restaurant menu and on the wall is not Chinese characters. It's the Uyghur language, which is not being suppressed at all, and everybody looks pretty relaxed. It's
Yeah.
like it doesn't seem like there are people hiding out like Anne Frank or something in Amsterdam or something.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like that situation at all. So the whole thing just doesn't jive with the narrative.
Yep.
So do you think there's any hope? It seems to me that particular narrative is totally locked in now. And for any Western consumer of corporate media or
This is
mainstream media.
this
Yeah,
is
go
how
ahead.
they report on China in general, right? For example, there's that famous social credit system in China. It's been first. There's a report came out. It went viral. Everybody shared it. That became almost a meme about China's social credit system, right? And then in 2018, Foreign Policy magazine came out with a debunking article saying, yes, the social credit system is actually a myth. But guess what? Nobody shared the debunking article. Like nobody pay attention to that. It's the same article. Remember there was an article about this some kind of red chip that China is building this malicious
That
component.
might have even been Bloomberg. I think it was a pretty respectable
Yes,
source. It was a hardware. It was actually a
yes,
hardware backdoor that they were talking about, which I think
yes.
sounds very implausible. And I don't think there's a single serious technologist who believes that now.
But the public just still buy that. I mean, like you can try to debunk them 10,000 times. There's still some layman out there believing this is true. But this is kind of all the full spectrum propaganda war we're in now. Like almost everything we consume about China from mainstream media, you have to view it with a suspicious eye because of stuff like this.
Yes. So, I mean, maybe now we can start spiraling in toward Ukraine,
Yes.
because one of the things I noticed with this Ukraine conflict is that there are just wildly divergent narratives about what's happening in Ukraine. And separately, of course, it seems to be just open season on Russians. You can just say any negative thing you want about Russians in general,
Yeah.
and discriminate against them without any repercussions. And I think you may have said this on your Twitter thread. Other people have said the same thing, that when things really go live against China, the amount of discrimination and aggressive action against individual Chinese living in America is going to be just off scale because we're not even white.
Yeah, I mean, like, at least the Russians can blend in, if they just don't open their mouth. But our face, we wear the face of the enemy, right? Like people, not even just Chinese, anybody who look like remotely like East Asian is going to become a target in the United States, like it is now. Now we have people, Nepalese, Sri Lankans, and even some Hispanic lady who got targeted because they thought that, they're Chinese. I mean, it's just gonna get much worse if there's actual hot war between China and United States proxy even.
I agree with that. And I think just as anything said about Russia or what's happening in Ukraine, I think you honestly, again, this is against the narrative, but you have to take it with a grain of salt. And certainly that's by now also the case for anything you read about China.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I actually saw a tweet somewhere. They say because right now we're being flooded with stories of like the Russian debacle and the Russian incompetence in prosecuting the war, right? And then I read a tweet. It says, "Well, reading kind of the Ukrainian war report is like reading the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic accounts of their victories. The victory is coming closer and closer to the capital, like we won a victory 100 miles from our capital. We win another victory 50 miles from our capital. Oh, we win a great victory at our capital. I mean, that's kind of what's happening right now. You see the accounts of like the Russian hardware being destroyed, the Russian army get bogged down. But then you look at the report where this is happening. It's getting closer and closer and closer to Kiev.
I do see some people preparing the readers, I guess one nickname I could use for them is the NPCs, the non-player characters who actually consume this media uncritically. The ones who think 10% of the Uyghurs have been killed in Xinjiang or
Yep.
something. They are preparing the NPCs for the fact that the Russians are eventually going to win this thing.
Mhm.
I do see some of that occasionally, right? So I think it's sort of shifting toward, you know, Russians are bombarding civilians,
Mm.
without any concern, and they're terrible. And the brave Ukrainians are fighting like lions and defeating the Russian military. But the Russians will eventually win because they're just they're so overpowering. There are too many of them.
They're a horde. Yeah, the Russian
Yeah, the
horde.
horde of Asiatic Russians is going to still win.
Yeah.
I mean, aside from the day-to-day progress of the conflict, there's also the history that goes back to the Maidan coup.
Yep.
I think all of that is just way too complicated for the average
Yes.
American reader to absorb. And so obviously, we'll just forget about that. And it was just that Putin went crazy and wants to reestablish the
Yeah.
USSR. And that's
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how many Americans still think Russia is like the same as Soviet Union. Like Russia today is a very conservative, very anti-communist state. It's nothing like Soviet Union, but somehow people think Russia is bringing back the communism or something.
yeah, I don't know if it's so much communism as kind of just a very highly authoritarian state. But I think, you know, we could go on for a long time to talk about the specifics of the conflict itself and the background, the history of, Ukraine and NATO and all this. But, the thing I really wanted to ask you about is that I regard the US using Ukraine to, in a sense, incite this conflict by not compromising with the Russians, on their
Yeah.
doorstep. Okay, we've ended up in this conflict. Let's just leave it at that because
Yeah.
we don't need to get into exactly all the history. People who are interested can read a long blog post that I wrote with a lot of sources in it.
Nice.
But but and quoting famous people like Mearsheimer and
Yep.
the former ambassador to Russia, who's now our CIA director, who himself wrote all these forbidden things in his biography, which was just published, autobiography, which was just published 2 years ago. So you can go read what our current CIA director Burns wrote about what the U.S. was doing in Ukraine just 2 years ago when his biography was published. You can see it's 100% against the current narrative of who's responsible and what events led up to this invasion. But of course, now that he's CIA director under Biden, he's got to keep quiet about it, but it's all recorded in his biography. You can order his autobiography off of Amazon and just read it.
Yeah.
But don't let those, if you're an NPC, don't let those facts, sneak into your consciousness. What I wanted to discuss with you is that, okay, I believe this is a huge geopolitical mistake for the US to force Russia into a tighter and tighter relationship, even verging now on a dependency because of the
Yes.
strength of the sanctions on China. And I think you probably have thought through in more detail than I have the ways now in which China is going to help Russia get through this period of sanctions. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me that at the end of the war, at the end of the Cold War, Russia wanted to join the West. When Putin became
They asked to join NATO at one point.
Yes, that was Putin when he first became prime minister in 1997 or
Yeah,
1998.
yes, Bill Clinton in person.
Yes. And because they just wanted to be seen as an equal partner. But because we are so arrogant, because we're the sole hyperpower now, and that we thought we can just aggressively expand NATO to their doorstep with no repercussion. There was a video surfacing of Joe Biden speaking in 1997 when the Russian foreign minister Zyuganov told him, like, if you keep on pushing NATO to our border, we're gonna have to turn to China. And Biden basically laughed in his face and say, "Well, good luck with that," right? And that's what's happening now, ironically.
Well, when you mentioned an old video of Biden, I thought you were going to mention one from maybe around 97, 98, where he says Ukraine cannot be part of NATO. This would cause World War III. I mean, he effectively says again what is the verboten, part of the narrative right now. And I mean, he just explicitly says it in this old when he was a senator.
Yeah, I mean
So
that's when Biden was still coherent and lucid, and
yeah,
that was 25 years ago. But
this particular brainwashing of the public is much more shocking in a way than the Xinjiang one, because no American can even locate Xinjiang on a map. And, but this is one where, a pretty good chunk of the top strategic leadership of the United States has been warning against pushing too hard in terms of expanding NATO to the east and the status of Ukraine. Leading figures, former secretaries of defense, I mentioned many ambassadors to Russia and the Soviet Union, people who actually won the Cold War, have been warning against this for a long time. And now that's all been memory hold, even though you can quickly, in 5 seconds, locate a video of our President Biden, saying exactly these things when he was a senator. But apparently that's all memory hold too.
But Stefan, who watch government official talk nowadays? Now people get their information from TikTok influencers, right?
Yes.
And
Okay.
White House just hosted a top TikTok influencer on White House to debrief them, quote unquote, on the Ukraine war progress. So yeah.
Yeah. So for sure, the West is winning the information war, and the information war is primarily being conducted against their own people.
Yes,
And
very successfully.
yeah, in the blog post, sorry, I keep advertising it, but I have a segment from Indian television where there's an Indian news person interviewing 2 generals from the retired generals from the Indian military. And they're calling the war the way you and I are calling the war, totally against the Western narrative, and even saying things like the Russians are slowed down because they're trying to kill as few civilians as possible. It's not like when the U.S. went into Iraq in 2003. They're saying things which are completely verboten, would get you banned from Twitter or YouTube. I think this information war is not fooling generals in the Indian military.
Right.
It is fooling average Americans who read the New York Times.
It's actually, I hosted a Twitter space talking about China's role and also just China, Russia, Ukraine in this war. And I, to my surprise, I got a lot of people joining in from the global South, and it was really refreshing to hear these global South voices. People from South Africa, from Brazil, from Southeast Asia, from India, and the views they're espousing, just like the Indian generals, are totally different from the kind of the mainstream narrative we hear in the United States.
Well, I think that it's primarily people in the United States and EU and basically Western countries that are, as I said, they're the victims of this
Yes.
information war. People from the global South, BRICS countries, non-aligned countries, they're much more likely to actually to see it from the Russian perspective.
Yeah.
Especially if we're talking about, say, an educated subclass.
Yeah.
They can remember reading about what happened in Maidan.
Yeah.
They maybe heard the video or the tape of Victoria Nuland talking about installing a pro-American leader, debating with the ambassador who that leader should be.
Yeah.
I mean, so they
Or
may remember some of these events from
or
8
or
years ago.
even Newland handing out cookies to the protester on
Yes,
Maidan.
the Cookie Monster.
Yeah. It's really amazing that because Russia and China at the end of the Cold War both wanted to have good relationship with the West, right? And in fact, both of them prioritize their relationship with the West over with each other because it makes sense because U.S. Back then was still the world's largest economy. Well, now it is still nominally in U.S. dollar terms, but back then, U.S. is so much more important. But we just thought we don't need them. We don't need to care about their security concerns. We can do whatever we want, because like that's why Biden laughed at Zuganov. It's like, go ahead, turn to China, see if we care. Um,
Right. So let's focus in on the turn to China and exactly what forms this cooperation is likely to take, in particular to deal with the sanctions. So let's turn to that because I think that's the part of the discussion which I think maybe a lot of our listeners won't be so familiar with, and there's a lot of detail here.
Yeah, so I mean, for a lot of the American perception of China-Russia relationship is still stuck in the Sino-Soviet split era. So I have to say that the Sino-Soviet split was over by 1989 when Gorbachev visited Beijing to meet Deng Xiaoping. It's right in the middle of the Tiananmen Square protest. After that, Russia-China had great relationship, and China had a friendly relationship with the Soviet successor state, Russia. China actually have friendly relation with both Russia and Ukraine. Surprising as it may be to many people, China also had great relation with both Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Israel, right? All these states, locked in antagonistic relationships because China pursue a non-interference policy. They focus on trade. China don't care about your domestic issues. And China also sees the current issue between Russia and Ukraine as a bilateral issue between Russia and Ukraine. From China's perspective, though, I think China would much prefer stability because they are currently building out the Belt and Road Initiative. One part of it, the belt part of it, is a Euro-Asian economic belt, which is rely on the Eurasian land bridge to build through Russia to reach for the Chinese goods to reach the EU market, right? But with the war, that the Eurasian land bridge is not going to reopen anytime soon. So from China's perspective, China rather sees the conflict wrap up as quickly as possible, and so we can return to business as usual.
Yes, I think the China, their preferred outcome right now is a quick end.
Yes.
And a quick end in which Putin is not the loser, so he's not
Yes.
destabilized, but the sanction, the damage from the war and, maybe the sanctions are lifted earlier because the war ends quickly before there's too much death and destruction. And nevertheless, the trauma between Russia and the West is so strong
Yes.
that basically now there's no chance of a Russia-China breaking up the Russia-China relationship.
Yeah.
So I think China is the big winner
Yeah.
from these events, as long as it doesn't go so long that Putin loses power because, for example, he's not able to win.
Right. Right, correct. That's correct. I mean, there's a lot of complacency in United States to think that, oh, well, China and Russia, they're basically a marriage of convenience. Like this will never last. But at the same time, U.S. is doing all it could to push Russia and China together since 1990s. And
Yeah. Well, also, I think you were right when you said a lot of the people who claim what you just said are stuck in this 1980s Sino-Soviet split because they still think that China wants to recover Vladivostok and lots of territory, whereas they've settled all those territorial disputes with the Russians.
Yep.
And frankly, demographically, the Chinese are moving away from the northeastern part of the
Yep.
country. Nobody wants to live there. So certainly nobody wants to live even further north in
Yep.
Siberia.
I mean, just
So
like Chinese people are no different from the folks everywhere else. Nobody wants to move to the land of snow. Everyone moving to the Sun Belt.
yeah, and I think an outcome where they're able to just trade for the natural resources there and just buy it is to them preferable to trying to invade a country that still has thousands of nuclear weapons.
Yes.
I think the logic behind the idea that the Russia-China relationship can't last is just wrong. I think these people are poorly informed.
Yeah, because and Chinese and Russian economy are fully complementary because Russia is a commodity producer and China is a commodity consumer. And
Exactly.
and also buying from Russia also bypass the chokehold US Navy has on the streets of Malacca. US Navy made no secret about this, how the streets of Malacca is a chokehold on Chinese energy supply if they wanted
Yep.
to. And that's why U.S. Navy is now in South China Sea carrying out so-called freedom of navigation patrol. This is the time when 80% of the shipping through South China Sea is either to or from China. And yet
Mhm.
U.S.'s Navy is somehow claiming they're protecting the sea lanes from the Chinese for the Chinese market. It's totally
Yeah,
ridiculous.
I agree with you, and an interesting analysis of those artificial islands that now have been built by China in the South China Sea. If you look at the missile ranges, of what they will install or have installed actually on those islands, it covers the Malacca Strait. So, you know, US naval operations to dominate that region now are going to be much more challenging. I think they have to be conducted by submarines because surface ships can be taken out.
Yeah.
And the satellite coverage that the Chinese have over that region is very good. So they're able to hit US ships even in the Malacca Strait or even in the Indian Ocean.
And
So go ahead.
yeah, that's why the Russian land link is very important for China to get its energy supply because there's no way U.S. can overtly attack pipelines, China Russia pipeline without escalating into a nuclear war, right? So, whereas even today, U.S. Navy still have superiority over the Chinese Navy on the blue water.
Yes, obviously that would be a much more difficult competitive struggle
Yeah,
than just switching on the energy flow from Russia.
yeah. So
Now, maybe talk about are you familiar with Power of Siberia?
yes. So currently, Russia already has a gas pipeline to China called the Power Siberia One. Now, this connects a gas field in the east part of Russia, in the Russian Far East. That this is a gas that would never reach Europe because there's no pipelines to the west. So the only market they have is East Asia. So currently, the Power Siberia 1 is already supplying gas to China. Now there's also a plan of Power Siberia 2. So now the gas in Yamal Peninsula, which is in the Arctic circles, goes to Europe. That's a plan for the Nord Stream 2, to supply a lot of this gas to Germany. But now Germany held up the certification for Nord Stream 2 because of Ukraine war. The Power of Siberia 2 aimed to connect the Yamal gas field in far north Siberia all the way down, possibly through Mongolia to China. So this time, before the energy market, kind of the Russian energy supply to China and Europe were separate because they were from completely separate gas fields. But once the Power of Siberia 2 is built, I think it would take maybe 4 to 5 years to complete. But once that's built, Europe can no longer count on itself being the sole receiver of energy from those big Siberian gas and oil fields because now Russia could easily just export them to China. And Russia will, especially under sanction.
Right. And I guess in some of the estimates I've seen from Western European analysts just in recent days is that they're planning on a decade to switch away from dependence on Russian gas. So to build LNG ports and LNG deliquefaction
Yeah.
plants and things like this. So it looks like it could be a race against time with the Europeans trying to wean themselves from Russian energy. And meanwhile, the Russians building this pipeline where they could just, instead of sending it to Germany, sending it to China.
Yep. Yep. Again, I think a lot of it's also Germany is also playing politics, right? They're holding up the certification for Nord Stream 2. They're not uninstalling the pipeline. So, at any time they could reverse that policy and let the
Right. So
gas flow.
if Zelensky, if they come to terms
Yep.
and they say, okay, Ukraine will write neutrality into its constitution, which was in its constitution, I think, until Maidan,
Yep.
if I'm not incorrect. And then I guess there might be some territorial gains. That's maybe a sticking point right now in the East.
Yeah.
But definitely the breakaway republics will break away and Crimea will be recognized as Russian. It seems like that would end the conflict. And then after a polite delay, the Germans could just turn Nord Stream 2 back on.
Yep. I think that's probably the German calculus right now. But we don't know whether U.S. will allow that to happen because there's a lot of hawks right now who want to turn Ukraine into Russia's Afghanistan, right? And to bleed the Russians to the last Ukrainians.
Right.
And that's, the goal was never to actually absorb Ukraine into as a full member of NATO because Ukraine is much more useful as a buffer zone where they can, carry out proxy warfare against Russians without having the fear of being escalated into a nuclear exchange, right? So we'll have to see how that resolves. But in the meantime, China is throwing an economic lifeline to Russia. As you rightly point out, China do not want to see Russia falter, to Russia fail coming out of this, because before Ukraine war, China, let's remember, China was fully in the crosshair of U.S. So, if Russia falls, China will be much more isolated in terms of U.S. Strategic encirclement. That's why China will probably do its best to keep the Russian consumer supply with consumer goods, which it can.
Could we talk about the mechanics of that? Okay, there are no U.S. sanctions preventing, say, Huawei or Xiaomi from selling products in Moscow, right? And go ahead.
So for Xiaomi, U.S. could currently there's no sanctions, but U.S. could apply sanctions on Xiaomi because Xiaomi is still building on a lot of the U.S. made platform and U.S. made components because Xiaomi is on Android platform, right? It relies on Android. One of the reason U.S. sanctioned Huawei is because Huawei trying to build its own independent OS system and trying to do its own chip design, not using Qualcomm chips, and that's what led U.S. to come down with a ton of bricks on Huawei. But on the other hand, Huawei has no incentive now not to sell to Russia. It's already
so Huawei could sell Harmony OS handsets to, that's their now Android alternative. They could sell Harmony OS handsets to Russia, but
Huawei still have a problem with the chip because because it's under semiconductor sanction by United States, and China is still, I think, several years away from cracking the code on how to make 7-nanometer chips commercially. Commercial grade 7-nanometer chips domestically, because before Huawei relied on TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductors. And
So in terms of phones, things that need, say, 7-nanometer or below 20-ish nanometer, I don't know if this was your area of double E or not, but the below 20-ish nanometer, which I think they have to go to Samsung or TSMC for.
Yeah.
Those products could be stopped from flowing into Russia.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's how U.S. pretty much killed Huawei's handset market. Like before, I'm in Indonesia. There's like Chinese phones everywhere. Before, it's very easy to get Huawei phone, but after U.S. sanctions, basically Huawei handset disappeared from all the shops because Huawei they only stock up limited number of chips. Their stockpile is running low, and they have to give priority to their other business.
One of their sub brands called Honor, they've spun out now, so maybe Honor
Ah,
came. But the thing is that once it becomes a big item in Russia, it's still possible for the U.S. just to sanction them and say, okay, fine, you guys are selling too much of this stuff in Russia, so now we're going to cut you off from TSMC chips, for example.
yeah.
So that's definitely a hole in what China could potentially provide Russia. In terms of just general consumer goods that you buy on Alibaba, on AliExpress, I noticed a lot of the reviews on AliExpress are from Russians, actually. Um,
Yeah.
it seems like there's not going to be any shortage of consumer goods
Right. Right.
that they can get from China. And not all Russian banks have been sanctioned. So I think even the transactions, or maybe the Russians can just download, Alipay or something. Just
So after Mastercard and Visa sanctioned
yes,
Russia, Russian banks are in talks with China Union Bank.
Union Pay.
Yeah, they're syncing up with UnionPay. Also, now after the SWIFT sanctions, Russian companies are in talk with China to switch to the SIP system, which
Yep.
China built in 2015 as an alternative to SWIFT for possible scenario like this. For the scenario where U.S. is going to apply SWIFT sanction to kick companies off the SWIFT, and initially was probably designed with Chinese company in mind, but the SIP system allowed, for example, the Russia-China trade to be settled in yuan instead of dollars. So
Right. So in terms of general consumer products, setting aside chips for the moment, it doesn't seem like there's any problem either for Russian companies or even Russian individuals to order consumer goods from
no,
China.
no.
So the amount of suffering, I think, is going to be quite limited in those categories, right? I mean,
In fact, there's some TikTok videos that's going around in China social media right now. It's the bunch of Russian TikTokers. They're going to the mall right now in Russia, and all the Western brands are closed. All the Western brand stores are closed, but the Chinese stores are still open, like Xiaomi, right? Xiaomi is
or
still yeah,
leaning sneakers and
yeah,
tracksuits.
yeah.
Okay, what are the other vulnerabilities? So aircraft spare parts. Have you thought at all about that?
Yes, so that is a problem because China itself rely on a lot of the components sourced from Boeing, Airbus, etc. So if U.S. and EU decide to apply sanction against these Chinese companies, they might be forced not to supply to Russia as well. So that is a issue. Yeah.
So is it possible that commercial aviation travel within Russia, say 3 months from now, could be almost, shrunk to zero because of lack of spare parts?
I'm not an expert on that, but it will definitely be impacted, I imagine.
Right. Because they don't have an easy alternative, right? They
Yeah.
can't, even if, there's this whole issue of they have leased planes and they're saying we're just going to keep the planes,
Yeah.
since by the way, the idea that our central banks could just take the foreign reserves of
Yeah.
the Russians, hundreds of billions of dollars.
Well,
If that's not an act of war, I don't know what an act of war is,
I mean, they
actually.
did that to
But
Afghanistan just before that, they
yeah,
Biden
well,
took
we've done it many times to other countries, but to
yeah.
do it to Russia is kind of a big deal. But they're going to get away with it, I guess. But
Yeah.
okay, but although they may just keep all the leased planes, they are
Mm,
not going to be able to fly them without spare parts.
yeah. Yeah, that could be. I mean, it depends how much US want to crank up the fire on China for doing business on Russia. That I mean, because it's really paradoxical because now you also have Blinken asking China for help. right, to resolve
Yes.
the Russia-Ukraine issue. But at the same time, U.S. is still have all these sanctions on different Chinese companies, right? They just recently, today there was a news where the TikTok Oracle deal was supposed to come into a close because the U.S. government is forcing TikTok to into a partnership with Oracle, where they will have all these security experts, vetted by the U.S. government to be embedded with TikTok to make sure the TikTok data stays in U.S. and U.S. government can get a hold of
I
that.
saw that. I saw that.
Yeah.
It is actually rational for the US to do this because the information war partially is on TikTok.
Yeah.
And if they didn't have control over what kind of TikTok videos American teens could watch, then China could potentially win the info war.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the future. So I understand why they want to do that. So what do you rate the odds of a relatively near term settlement in
Oh man,
Ukraine?
this is hard. Predicting future is always foolhardy because before the war, I honestly thought Putin was just saber rattling, and I thought at most he would do is maybe send troops into the Donbass region, into the breakaway
Yeah. I
republics.
I also thought he wasn't going to go in big.
Yeah, I mean, I had an argument. I had a debate with a military watcher guy in my Facebook group. He was saying there's a high chance of Russia full scale Russia invasion. I didn't believe him, but now it turns out he was right. I was wrong because his argument was, Russia put all its military asset around Ukrainian borders. This would be just too expensive for a military exercise or just even just a high pressure negotiation tactic. Those troops had to do something. So he was right.
My
So
my
I
guess is that sorry to interrupt you. My guess is that Putin and his circle regret not doing this in 2014,
yes, yes.
2015, when it would have been easy. And so I think maybe he regards it as part of his legacy that he's gotta settle this matter.
So I maybe this is so people make a lot of comparison between China, mainland China and Taiwan versus Russia and Ukraine. This is actually a perfect transition point because for one of the strategic calculus for Putin is because Ukraine was getting all these Western fundings and NATO fundings. The Ukraine is actually building up its military capability since 2014. So maybe he felt he had to act now rather than later before he couldn't do. Maybe at some point in the future he would not be able to do what he's doing now. Whereas,
I agree with you because obviously they have strengthened the Ukrainian military quite a bit since 2014,
yep.
2015.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the argument against China to do a full Normandy on on Taiwan speeches is that the strategic calculation is quite different because in 1990 I lived in China in 1980, so I remember at that time Hong Kong was like something like 25% of GDP of entire mainland China, and back then Taiwan's economy was many times bigger than Hong Kong. So, but that has shrunk significantly, and Taiwan's Hong Kong economy is like 1 or 2% of the entire GDP of mainland China now, and so the cross strait calculus, China is growing stronger and stronger by day. The mainland China is growing stronger and stronger by day. So it's a quite different scenario, let's say Russia versus Ukraine. So China has a lot less time is on China's side.
I agree with that. And I think that, they would rather wait until the relative power the difference in relative power is so strong that they can just leverage a peaceful settlement out of Taiwan.
Yep. And really
But
the mainland China Taiwan issue is really an issue between US and China. Right. So China is really waiting for the time when China was so strong that US couldn't say no. That's
or the US will sell Taiwan to China for
exactly.
some other concessions.
Exactly.
But here's a plausible scenario where things can go wrong and they're going to be forced to go, which is that The U.S. has not tried to develop the kind of intermediate range missiles that the Chinese developed. So the Chinese right now have within that theater of the Western Pacific, they can hit all the U.S. bases, they can hit all the Taiwanese bases easily with precision weapons and also aircraft carriers. But the smart American strategists want to, now that they've pulled out of the intermediate range missile treaty with the Russians, they can develop similar kinds of missiles and
Yes.
put them all over the Pacific pointed at China.
I,
And
I,
that could actually make an invasion of Taiwan extremely difficult.
I mean,
So
I think that's
go ahead.
what the THAAD was kind of start of that, right? When they put the THAAD on Korea, that was
Well, yeah, I'm not talking about anti-missile missiles. I'm talking about offensive missile capability, which can be used to take out ships easily because satellites now can image from low Earth orbit. Satellites can track all the ship, not just military ships, but even commercial ships can all be tracked in real time now. So if I know where your ship is, and I have a missile with a range of 1,000 miles, I can just take your ship out. And that just it's a weird oddity of history that the Chinese were not part of the intermediate range nuclear treaty, but the Russians and the Americans were. So the Russians and the Americans didn't develop this kind of missile, maneuvering, terminal seeking intermediate range missile. The Chinese like DF-21, DF-26, and lots of other variants now. They've now developed all this stuff and the Americans didn't. But now the American strategists realize they're going to need this stuff. So if they start putting this stuff in all around the bases in the Pacific, the calculus, it may be a little bit more like Putin's calculus here, where if he doesn't go now, he may not be able to go later. And so that's the most worrisome thing for me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there is this thinking among the Pentagon that U.S. have a short time window from maybe 10 to 15 years, while China still hasn't fully developed its military capabilities to, while U.S. still have military superiority for U.S. to do something, right? Because
Yeah.
the thing is, after 20 years, Chinese economy will be so large that, it would U.S. even if U.S. wanted to do something, you would not be able to. And yes, this is so the next 10 to 15 years is kind of the danger zone window. Um,
I
I
I
agree.
do I agree with that general observation, but I would even say a little bit more strongly. I would say when you war game out a Taiwan conflict today, US gets beat. So China actually can take the island and actually hold off US forces, I think, in most of these war game outcomes. Okay.
But the
Now,
problem is, how do you prevent it from escalate into a nuclear exchange? That's see the how I have not seen anybody talk about de-escalation, right? There's a lot of talk about escalation, but if a U.S. aircraft carrier group gets sunk, if a U.S. aircraft carrier gets sunk, how is it not going to escalate into a nuclear exchange? This
oh,
is
right. I
right.
think the gamble that Xi Jinping would have to make, like suppose they had to go now or 3 years from now or something, right? Say for whatever reason, like
Right.
US tells Taiwan to declare independence
Yes.
and recognizes them. I mean, I don't think it's likely, but suppose it happens 3 years from now. I think it potentially, if you're Xi Jinping, it's reasonable to think you can take the island, and before the US can marshal a response, you can present them with a fait accompli and very strong area denial capabilities because of these intermediate range missiles, conventional missiles. And then you then have to gamble that the US is not going to go for it. If they go for it, then it's very tough to try to retake Taiwan or, cut off the oil to China, whatever it is. It's very hard then to avoid that escalating into a nuclear
Yeah.
confrontation. If you can quickly go and get Taiwan before the US can respond in large force, then it's up to them to decide, do they want to incite World War III or not? And I think that's the only way that China can think about it. But that window could close if the pivot to Asia is a pivot to the Pacific that Obama wanted to start actually is executed properly, which means new weapon systems, hypersonic missiles, intermediate range missiles, stationed by the U.S. on its existing bases all around the Western Pacific, that actually prevents the scenario that I was just describing where they can quickly grab the island.
Right.
So it's a more subtle and complicated strategic situation, I think, than most people appreciate.
Right. So it's the thing I look at it is that government on Taiwan would not do anything big or drastic without explicit approval or support from United States government, right?
I
So
agree.
there's only we know what China's red line is, right? The red line is Taiwan government on Taiwan declare formal independence. So Taiwan will not declare formal independence unless U.S. wanted them to, which the only reason U.S. will want them to is to go China to attack and to spark a war. But I don't see even at this point what U.S. gain from that. U.S. military industrial complex gain a lot from continued tension with China, right? They can continue the grip on a near $1 trillion military budget. But what do they gain from actual war? I fail to see that.
Well, I think if you're a long-term strategic thinker for the United States, the logic is that currently the US is the hegemon in Asia, and we don't want China to become the hegemon or to displace us as hegemon because Asia is the center of economic gravity on the planet is shifting steadily toward Asia. So most of the GDP in the planet is in that region now. So if you're an American strategic planner, you just want to keep China from becoming predominant in Asia.
This is
And
basically the Mearsheimer's line, right? I mean, what he has been
yes,
proposing. But even Mearsheimer's proposal is not really being fully adopted, implemented by the U.S. Leaders. Because one of the Mearsheimer's proposal is actually U.S. make nice with Russia. Don't stir up trouble in Ukraine.
well, of
And
course, a correct execution of the pivot to Asia means you stabilize your relationship with Russia, you stabilize Europe, you maybe ideally neutralize Russia
yes,
vis China, and then you can pivot to Asia.
yes.
And that's all in shambles. And that's all in shambles because of stupid execution by our neocons in Ukraine.
Well, I mean, this has always been the case, though. I mean, like Alan Greenspan talked about the reason we went to Iraq, right, was to control the flow of oil. He says not to take their oil, but to control the flow of oil. But the idea was that the Persian Gulf is becoming very important supplier to China, and by U.S. going to Iraq, U.S. can dictate the flow of oil. But that, we all know how that went, right? I mean, you can't.
I mean, I agree with what you said, and not only did we fail in Iraq, and it was a monumental failure. If you look carefully at what the Saudis are doing, for example, the Saudis are not cooperating. MBS wouldn't even talk to Biden recently about increasing oil production. But I think the Saudis are calculating at what point could they switch their security guarantees from U.S. defense to China and Russia.
Yeah, I mean, the people are hedging now. People are hedging because the U.S. record in the past 3 decades hasn't been very encouraging. I mean, like I remember watching Taiwan talk shows. When U.S. withdrew from Kabul, people are already making the comparison between kind of Taiwan and Afghanistan, and now they're definitely watching what's going down in Ukraine.
Yeah, we let Afghanistan. We didn't win in Afghanistan against a very not a very advanced military threat. We are not going to even try in Ukraine, right?
Yep.
And so if you're Saudi and you're saying, well, who's going to guarantee my security in the future? Russians and Chinese or Americans? Maybe at that point, for sure, you got to start hedging, and maybe you're going to start selling oil in RMB denominated contracts.
Yeah. The Saudi U.S. deal to price oil in dollar back in 70, that was the basis for the petrodollar and U.S. dollar.
That is under threat.
Yep.
That is under threat now.
Yep. And that's by U.S. policy. I mean, a lot of the U.S. decline in the last 20 decades is self-inflicted. I mean,
It's
it's not,
entirely I think it's entirely self-inflicted almost. I mean, you have to give some credit for China for successfully modernizing and stuff like that, but they also had a lot of help from US corporations.
Yeah.
So I wanna just, even more broadly, US China competition in the future. I mean, that's the overall theme. And these other things are just actually small theaters
yes.
of the bigger conflict. One of my theses, which I think is heavily overlooked, is that if you look at the production of highly skilled engineers and scientists, if you really try to attempt an actual honest calculation of the rate at which the two countries are producing, strong technologists, there's actually an order of magnitude in favor of China.
Yes.
And in fact, you could even argue that starting about now or maybe 10 years in the future, China will be producing, highly skilled technologists at a rate which equals the entire world ex China combined. So
Yeah.
if you look at the PISA scores of this, PISA is administered to 15-year-olds in all OECD countries. And you say, okay, and there's a German academic who's done this whole analysis and published it. So if you look at the kids who score at PISA level 6, which is in Western countries the top roughly 1 to 3% of the population, basically mastering a certain level of mathematics by the time they're 15. And you just add up, you just take every country in the world ex China, and then you take China and you add it up and you say, well, how many PISA level 6 kids are there in the world? China is roughly comparable to the rest of the world combined.
I, I used
And
I used to tell people that if I stayed in China, I don't have a very I mean I don't have a very good chance of getting into top Chinese elite university like Tsinghua or Beijing University. But look at me, I came to US and I got into Caltech. So I mean in China there's a lot of smart people. I remember in junior high, I was only as hard as I try, I was only like just barely above average. I was maybe like like in a class. I'm thinking my junior high class of because we did class rankings back then. In a class size of like 63, I was like 29, like
but
the top 29.
but it is true that I think you were a little more, from what you told me, you were a little more carefree when you were in China. And then when you came to Chicago, you were a little under a
Yes,
lot of pressure
more
to actually
driven.
do well. So,
Yeah, that was definitely more driven in United States. But
yeah,
part of that drive is also because when I came to US, I realized a lot of my peers don't really give a shit about study. So
yeah,
so if I just put in the effort and to actually study, I'm able to get ahead. Whereas
right,
that wasn't even possible for me back in China because everybody was working hard. But in US, I realized by me working hard, I can get ahead. I can become like top
right.
rank one or third in class, which for me wouldn't even be imaginable back in China.
So just to elaborate on this thesis a little bit, so it's easy for people to counter and say, well, these test scores, they don't mean anything. And we know these Chinese people are studying all the time. So of course the test overinflates their capabilities, right? The test is a overestimator of their capabilities versus people in other countries. Maybe that's true, but I could take another line of attack of evidence, which is that if you do follow technology broadly,
Yes.
and you ask, what is the rate of progress, say, in the last 10 years of China in jet engines, space exploration, satellite technology, microchip technology, software development, AI, material science, quantum compute, you make the entire list of everything, and you see that they're competitive with the rest of the world in every single one of those categories now.
And this was the China
And
when I was born that couldn't even produce its own chemical fertilizers.
yeah,
Back in
so
1970s, China was a raw commodity exporter. Yeah? Exported crude oil to Japan and imported refined products like gasoline and fertilizers. I mean that
right.
yeah.
But I think this trend really sped up in the last 10 years
Yep.
because 20 years ago, when I would visit other physicists, high energy physicists, for example, in China, I could see they were not at the research frontier. they could train students who would come to the top US PhD programs,
Hmm.
but they did not have top PhD programs themselves.
Yes.
That is not true anymore. Now they have top PhD programs. And you can just see across the board innovation. So if you could compute a first derivative of tech advancement rate and average it over all important areas of technology, their first derivative would be astonishingly high, like unbelievably high compared to any country right now. So,
That's
but very few people are capable of doing that analysis because they're not following China
Yep.
across all of these areas simultaneously.
I mean, that's why U.S. sanction on China was specifically targeted at semiconductors, because semiconductor is still one of the few areas where U.S. still have chokehold on China.
Yep. Yep. That's one of the few. And it'll be a very interesting question. I did a podcast with a guy in Taiwan who follows the semiconductor industry to discuss with him, the rate of catch up in, cutting edge fabs and fabrication technologies. So yeah, it's interesting because that's probably where the gap is the biggest. They're fully dependent on, ASML and, applied materials and other US, you know, somewhat US controlled technologies
Yep.
in cutting edge semiconductors. But it's not true in many other areas. So for
Yep.
example, there's a rover on the moon right now, which is a Chinese rover.
Yep.
There's a rover on Mars, which is a Chinese
Yep.
rover. There's a Chinese space station.
Yep.
It's not the International Space Station, it's their own space station. And when you look at the teams of the engineers and scientists who built all the stuff I just mentioned, they're young. They're so young.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I just think people are sleeping on this particular point. They're thinking it's just like before, where they kind of still need a little help from US companies. They need to steal some technology. They need grad students in the US to bring it back to them. I don't think that's true anymore,
That
actually. I think it's
they don't realize the time have changed. I mean, at the time of my father's generation, right? Like when my dad went to college in the 1960s, he was one of the few people in China who got into university. And when he was when he graduated in 1968 after Cultural Revolution, people like him got sent to the countryside, right, to raise pigs. My dad got to sent to Tibetan regions. Like, but when he was sent there, the local party secretary asked him, "Oh, so what do you do?" He said, "I'm a electrical engineer." They're saying, "Oh, engineer, great. We need somebody to build the roads," because they don't even know what to do with him. But that is not the China today. I mean, like, especially after Cultural Revolution, this is one of the reasons you mentioned a lot of the people, working on the Chinese space program are so young, because these are the fresh new generation that was being educated post Cultural Revolution. Like that's when China's education system have got back on track. China's economy start growing again. Now it's the total, like, China is finally getting back on track, and that's what we're seeing right now.
One of the areas where I kind of notice again a similar effect is if I compare effectively the kind of recommendation engine in TikTok versus YouTube,
Yeah.
it seems like the TikTok one is like a super
Yes.
genius compared to the YouTube one. Like it basically addicts you almost right away. Like you just start playing with the TikTok app for a little while, and then suddenly you're addicted because it just keeps showing you stuff that you're interested.
Now China
Whereas,
China has a
yeah, go ahead.
huge advantage in AI, because AI, they need a lot of sample size, a lot of training. Large Chinese population give them that advantage, give them tons of data, and that's
Yeah, but
go ahead.
okay, but okay, I agree with that in general, and in particular applications for sure. There are places where the Chinese data advantage is huge. But if you think about TikTok versus YouTube, YouTube's user base worldwide is
That's
pretty
true.
huge. So I
That's
do not think, and TikTok is at least when it started was a fairly small. ByteDance was not that predominant. So I think they actually have better algorithms for
Yes.
addicting you to their content than YouTube does.
Yes.
That's my judgment.
Well,
And
that's why U.S. government try to force them to give up their source code.
yeah. Oh, the other thing I was going to say, going back to narrative information warfare and narrative control, I notice is that this information war, say in the context of Ukraine or vis-a-vis China, it's a war on Americans because they're trying to control what Americans know or understand about the war in Ukraine or about the situation in China, things like this. But what's interesting is because there was so much suppression of the, roughly half, maybe a little bit less than half, but roughly half of the population that liked Trump, those people have been suppressed so much that they've become 100% distrustful of mainstream media and narratives.
Yeah.
So I actually notice if you go to the pro-Trump conservative sites now, they are quite capable of detecting the falsity of the standard narrative about Ukraine. So I'm starting to
Mm.
see them cover the Ukraine war in a much more realistic fashion
But
than the New York Times. Yeah, go ahead.
But I want to add caveat on that because that's because the U.S. always have this kind of divide, right? The Republicans always, the Democrats want to go to war with Russia, and the Republican wants to go to war with China. So RT always has a pandering for the right wing, and then for people like Fox News, like people like Chris Tucker, they see Russia as a fellow white Christian country, and where they share much more similar cultural values than say China, this alien civilization. I mean,
I,
in one of the Tucker video, he made a very good point about this disinformation warfare against Russia by saying, Russia didn't do this to us, Russia didn't do this to us, but he paraphrasing away to saying our real enemy is China. He's saying,
yeah,
yeah,
Yeah, in fact, I think that he had a long segment on the biowarfare, the bio research labs in Ukraine,
yes,
and he completely undermined the Pentagon's narrative and the White House spokes. But then he said our real enemy is China, right?
yep,
So, or we hate everything about the Chinese government, or even China. I think he said.
yep,
So I agree with you that. So yes, in this conservative websites and media outlets, they're more prone to discover the falsity of the narrative vis-a-vis Russia than about China. And they're liable to embrace all kinds of untrue, unrealistic things about China as well. I think that's definitely true. So I think that's an important distinction. But they're just also just generally less willing to accept things told to them by the Washington Post or the New York Times or,
sure.
CNN. So the things are kind of broken. So the information war isn't completely a victory because half of our own population actually, doubts large chunks of the narrative.
Yeah, in terms of U.S. context, yes, but unfortunately, it's still negative for China. Even like among the U.S. leftists, they would decry the U.S. propaganda against countries like Cuba or Venezuela, but they will believe everything about Xinjiang. You said in the
I agree. I think both left and right in the U.S. are prone to believe all the negative things said about China.
Yeah, and I think it's because the cultural aspect is a big thing because they for Latin America, there's a cultural closeness, for people to get the context, to gain the understanding, and for them, China still remain this large alien civilization that they know nothing about, and so
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the deep history of humanity, I mean, the Eurasian landmass is where the highest development happened, right? In terms of technologies and, writing systems and, all kinds of things, right? I mean,
yep,
some exceptions like, Incans and Mayans and things like this, but mostly on the Eurasian landmass. And then at the two extremes, right? You have the far west, which is Europe, and you have the far east. So the absolute furthest points from each other on that Eurasian landmass, you have two great civilizations now, which are the 21st century is going to see which one ends up on top.
Well, I'm gonna challenge you on that, unless you include the Far West as a part of Middle East, Mesopotamia, and all that, because for the longest time that area was a center of civilization, and the Western Europe was on the fringe, at least until the Roman
Oh,
Empire, right?
no, I totally agree with you. I should refine what I meant. So most of the highest developments at any given time in human civilization were somewhere on the Eurasian
Yes,
landmass.
yes,
Now, in the 21st century, the two, powerful regions are the far west and the far east.
yeah,
but they are also the most culturally separated.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
that's why it's very alien. It's so easy
Yeah.
for people with European backgrounds to believe the worst things about, say, China or Japan.
Yep.
On the other hand, China or Japan, having, almost been colonized and being the underdogs, they
Mhm.
understand the West much better than the West understands the East.
Yes. Yes. And also because, English became the language, lingua franca, right? Like for Chinese and other East Asians, learning English is a must, but not necessarily for monolingual Americans, right? We don't need to
Yeah.
learn
Oh,
another
absolutely.
language. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, okay, I've kept you more than 2 hours, so maybe I should let you enjoy your Saturday morning now.
No, this is
Um,
great. I actually greatly enjoyed this conversation. I feel like I could geek out on this forever.
oh, good. Well, we can always follow up.
Yeah.
I don't know how many listeners can. I guess if they can put up with 3 hours of Joe Rogan, they can put up with 2 hours from us. But let me end because
Yeah.
even if you don't have to get going, I have to get going at some point. You're in, I guess, what we could call Southeast Asia,
Yes.
and one of the most overlooked kind of polities is ASEAN,
Yes.
which, I think actually if you project a little bit, I think the ASEAN GDP could be comparable to Europe, relatively soon, or at least it's certainly not negligible. And it's something like 600 million people in ASEAN, right?
Well, if you
So
just take
yeah, go ahead.
Indonesia, right? I mean, Indonesia is the fourth most populous country in the world, just behind United States, right? But
Yeah.
we don't really hear a lot about Indonesia in U.S.
No,
right?
I mean, these are huge countries
Yep.
and gradually actually becoming, in terms of economic weight, significant.
Yep.
I guess I've been to Bali and I've also been to places like Kuala Lumpur. I just feel like that area is incredibly important. In fact, to some extent, the competition, as long as it stays economic and not military, the competition in Asia is largely, for example, whether China is going to become, more influential in ASEAN than the US.
I think in the economic sphere, I think U.S. already lost in the competition versus China in the ASEAN. I mean, that's why that is one of the reasons why the pivot Asia is mostly military. It's not even about economics, because China's pull in the region is just so much larger than United States. I mean, I don't like the only U.S. companies are in Indonesia is like all the extraction companies, right? Where like the Freeport Moran, they operate mines in Guinea, in Papua, in the Western Papua, and
Right.
yeah. But China is in like every facet of the economic life in Asia, at least from what I observe on Bali, right? Like the Chinese Chinese made the smartphone affordable to a lot of people on the global south. My babysitter has a smartphone. They're all Chinese made phones. And yeah, and we're all right now. I'm talking to you on Huawei build 4G infrastructure. So
Yeah. I think this is for insular Americans, it's hard for them, or even Europeans, it's hard for them to imagine this. But throughout most of Asia, if you just walk around, like I bet if you look up on your wall, like maybe the air conditioner is
mm,
a Chinese brand, the refrigerator could be a Chinese, it could hire, you know, maybe even, almost everything around you might be some kind of manufactured product that actually came to Indonesia from China,
yeah.
right? So, you know, I think it's just hard to understand how, the leading trading partner for most of these countries is going to be China.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just, I don't see how the US is going to reverse that trend. That trend is just going to continue building.
Yeah, I mean, see, a lot of the U.S. could talks about, China's taking over economically, but one of the thing is, a lot of U.S. multinationals, some U.S. companies, they're just not that interested in to invest in a lot of the global South places. For example, African countries or Southeast Asian countries, unless it's oil and gas or mines. Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't see a lot of Americans wanting to, get involved in winning business in those countries. It's almost like we're just ceding it to other competitors.
Yep.
So, do you see yourself living out the rest of your days in Bali, surfing every morning?
That's the plan. That's the plan. I always had a long-term plan that eventually I'm gonna retire to some Pacific islands and surf. But I just move up my retirement schedule a little bit. So yeah, this is my life. I'm living my dream right now, and I'm grateful to my Patreon followers for support me.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm very happy for you, and I'm glad I could finally get you on the podcast.
Yeah, yeah. Took a long time.